Hi everyone, and welcome to this next episode of the Story Tailor. So this is a podcast that I kind of started because I was so intrigued by people's stories and, what they tell themselves. And, I come from the perspective of health, and my line that I always like to use is that our biology normally follows our stories. And often when I'm working with people, you find there's a difference between the story that people are telling themselves, and these stories can be ones we've written for ourselves, stuff that's been told to us by our parents or our family or maybe society at large, but does that really follow our inner truth? And when there starts to be this disconnect, often that will play out in the physical or the emotional, and therefore the biology starts to either go with your story. I mean, how many people say, well, everybody in my family by the age of 40 has back pain? How much of that is actually a genetic predisposition, or how much of that is inherited behavior, right? So it may be that the biology is going with the story, or it may be that the biology is yelling at you because it thinks it's running a different story and you're kind of taking it down a different path. So I have a wonderful friend with me here today, my friend Tanya, who's lives just up the street from me, and we often just go out for walks together and start ranting about life. And we were doing one of these yesterday and kind of talking about this stuff. And I was like, well, we should record this. So here we are. So yes. Tell them a little bit about you and how story plays around in your life.
So story for me. Should I look at you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So story for me, my background has been always in communications and marketing and branding, and working with individuals and brands to help them tell their stories and really connect with the essence and identity of who they are. And then kind of the art of it is really sprinkling on the copywriting and the design and the content, and how are you going to tell the story. And so that's a lot of the work that I currently do.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've worked together a little bit as well. And how I kind of see you is that, you see people, you see truth in people, and have a way of being able to capture that. But actually the process that you take people through in developing what they think is their brand is actually helping them to really look at self and look at the truth underneath. Because a lot of us again paint this idea of who we want to be in the world, or for most people it's who we think will be accepted by the world. And therefore when you're kind of drilling down to get to the essence of it, do you come across those kind of disconnects?
All the time, I would say. Even actually just from the way that somebody like a founder of a company has set up their business and the process by which they're operating that business, after a while you can see has been really disconnected from who they are and the way that they want to be operating that business. And so after a while they're really drained. And the teams that they've hired and the support that they have within their company isn't actually supporting the essence of what it is that they've created to share with the world. So a lot of times it's kind of starting with that process and learning how to just create a new process that's more sustainable for the founder or for the individual. And then from there, understanding what the essence is of what they're wanting to share with the world. And then how do we want to tell that in a compelling way? And I think that we were talking earlier before we started this about how there's different, you were talking about how there's individuals that oftentimes are like artists or whatever it is. And so you can build a brand that kind of protects who you are personally, but choose to tell one element of that, as opposed to putting your heart on a platter and sharing that with the world.
Yeah, because I think that's key. A lot of people's stories are there to protect them. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like you say, if you've got someone who's very well known and, perhaps they want to keep a piece of themselves private and not have that kind of exposed to the world. But it's about how cognizant they are of of the fact that they're doing that. You know, if they're bought into the idea of this brand that isn't really their truth, that's when problems can start to occur. But if they know that this is the thing I have put out there, but I know who I am as me, and the people who are close to me and matter to me know that, then we're good. So it's not about always displaying the absolute truth, and often that's dictated by, you know, the world they're in, the industry they're in, or the culture they're in. You've got to conform to a certain extent.
It's like thinking about who the audience is, like that's the other part of it, is who are you communicating to, and so what do you have in common with them, and how can you most effectively grab their attention and bring them into whatever it is that you are, you know, offering to them.
Right.
And I think that there's been a major transition between, you know, I used to work with really large brands like Visa and Amazon Fashion, and just like larger brands that just by nature tend to have a more of a disconnect from who it is that they're trying to communicate to. And I've seen this trend where a lot of brands are kind of wanting to be more seamless. It's not about the logo, the big logo and the brand. It's about the community that they're supporting and being a little bit more seamless within that structure, and being more a part of, you know, that.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's the difference, isn't it, between something that's like a huge corporation like that isn't really one person, down to somebody who's just putting out their artwork or their, you know, music or whatever, that it is really about them. Because with a big corporation you can kind of construct an edifice, if you like, that puts the message out, but it's not really about an individual. But I think, you know, it was just kind of coming to me as you were talking that, you know, this is maybe the thing that's happened over many years, but we're sort of at the peak of it now, is that so many individuals are creating a brand, even if they've not got a product to sell or anything. It's just the whole social media thing has created everyone's profile. Everything you dial into on the net, you have to put a profile in, right? And answer all these questions about yourself. And so it's like we even just in our personal lives, we've become a brand in a sense. And we were talking just earlier about, you know, I read in a sort of psychology paper a few years back about how a lot of adolescents were creating sort of photoshopped versions of themselves for their social media profile, and then going to cosmetic surgeons and saying, make me look like my picture. And that there are plenty, I mean, we live in Los Angeles here, and so there are a lot of cosmetic surgeons here, and I'm like, who are the surgeons that are doing that, saying, yes, I'll do that for you? But it seems that there are people who will oblige that, but, you know, for me, I was just like, what is that? You know, that we are literally writing this story, you know, and again, as we said, that could be okay, but if it's in the absence of knowing who you are, or actually in the absence of self-love, because you can't see a picture of yourself and be okay with it, unless it's been photoshopped, and then you have to have cosmetic surgery to look like that. I mean, it's just
totally no, and I think that that's such a big part of it. What you're saying is that identity has really been, a lot of it has been created from the external environment, as opposed to really like understanding who you are inside. It's been really like you're pulled out of that at a young age. And I remember being in marketing and advertising in New York and getting to this point where I was just like, imagine if all of these major, you know, advertising and marketing agencies and companies put their heads together to do something good, like to positively influence, you know, society in a positive way. And it's just so interesting how the media really plays into everyone's identity and how they tell their own story from this like disconnected place.
It's like outside in versus inside out. And you know, that kind of, so it's creating a sort of you know, dualism in a sense, and it just sort of reminded me there of, you know, what I was kind of saying earlier, where a lot of the stories we write about ourselves in our head about who we are and what we're doing and where we're going are in the intellectual brain, but the body is either following that and playing it out, or kind of railing against it. And in kind of when we look at what we call psychoneuroimmunology, when you're looking at how our emotions and moods affect the biological system, we talk about top-down approaches and bottom-up approaches, and it kind of reminded me of the sort of outside-in and inside-out version, because when we if you're thinking about emotional states, these happen in the sort of lower brain structures, the limbic system, the sort of primitive areas of the brain, and the more what we call the prefrontal cortex up in the kind of forehead area, it's the more intellectual, reasoning, logic kind of area of the brain, but it's a late upgrade, right? We, as primitive humans, we only have the lower structures, and that's how we respond to our environment. And there isn't any wiring that goes from our prefrontal cortex to the amygdala in particular, which is like our little smoke detector that's just kind of looking out into the world going, are we safe? Is there a threat? Do we need to respond? Or are we good? Can we chat? Can we be open because we feel safe?
Right.
There's no wiring that goes from the prefrontal cortex to the amygdala. That's what we call the top down. So that's when people have like anxiety and things. You can't talk yourself out. It's so irrational. Why am I feeling like this? You try to talk yourself out of it. It doesn't work.
Right.
We have to use bottom up. We have to go to the body to change the physical or the physiological expression of that emotion. We can't. The wiring doesn't support it the other way. So we have to go bottom up. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of thinking with you in your process. Is there anything that you do to help people to kind of drop into the bodies rather than and get out of their heads?
And I've been exploring that a lot recently too. You and I have talked about anxiety at length, because that's something that's been a huge part of my own story and journey, and what that means and how to manage it and what, like, all of it. And what I've been experiencing a lot recently in cultivating my own process, which is what I do with other people as well. And a lot of it comes down to pleasure. And what I mean by that is like sensory experience. So like going out into nature, and not just going out to like go on a hike and get some fresh air, but like really being with nature, like the colors in the sky, the leaves, just like really getting into it. Even if it's for like 10 minutes, if it's cooking, whatever it is that you enjoy doing. For me, it's going out into nature. And it completely changes my whole perspective for the day. Right. Because I'm constantly tuning back into that exact moment that brings something that kind of just like lights me up creatively. And so, I think I answered your question.
Yeah, I was just talking about when you're working with someone. Yeah. And you kind of think they're answering all this from their head. Do you have a way to get them to kind of access that? Yeah.
I think that it has to do with deep listening. It's curiosity. It's just kind of asking intuitive questions, and then just creating a space. And there's for this deep listening, and for them to just have a moment with themselves and feel comfortable enough and safely. You're talking about safety, enough to do that. And I think that what I've noticed with working with a lot of people in more of the sort of like tech space or the business world is that they're highly intellectual. And that's great. It's amazing. Right. It's like how, that's the way that society has kind of been running for a while. And at the same time, it's harder for them to kind of drop into their bodies and come from and really connect with their hearts. How are you feeling? And the moment that you start getting into that language, they kind of turn off. How are you feeling? Whatever. So it's finding sort of like a middle path to slowly just bring them into the moment. And when you talk about deep listening and creating a container for them, that's not so tangible. So it's not something that's quite yet like recognized in that space yet. But there's a huge importance to that in just being able to relax enough to speak from your heart and connect with your own sense of self and identity.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like, what I'm experiencing just kind of globally and, on a sort of meta level is that there is this energetic shift happening on this planet right now, and that we are moving towards this heart-based, paradigm, and getting out of the intellectual. The sort of 20th century was all about that, and the 80s, looking back at all those kind of things. It's like, it's almost like an adolescence we had to go through, and now we're kind of dropping into that maturity of like coming back to the heart. And what I'm experiencing with some of the people that I'm working with is it's like you say, a lot of them are still in the head, but it's again, the biology is going, no, we're going this way now. That's what the frequency of the planet is demanding of us. And so a lot of people instinctively kind of at some level know they want to get there, but the brain is still, the higher structures of the brain are still railing against it a bit and trying to go, no, that'll make me look too woo-woo, or that'll make me, so there's this sort of resistance going on, but it's getting harder and harder to resist. So it's having that, some languaging, some entry points to help people go, this is okay, make that safe to drop into that.
Yeah, definitely. What you said is so vital, I feel, for this time. And like we always talk about, it's like you modeling that within yourself makes it okay. And you realize, it's like always, a lot of people look at different models of like what's successful. And so far, success has been a specific process to get there that isn't necessarily sustainable for everybody. And so there's, having a deeper level of trust in what your intuitive process is to get from point A to point B. Like really understanding how to listen to yourself and trusting that is a huge part of it.
Yeah, and it's, like you're saying, there was this kind of, method of success that people have been sticking to. That's another story, right? It's a societal story of, you need to, if you're setting up your own business, you've got to work 24/7. You're going to be exhausted. If you're not bleeding, sweating and crying, you're not working hard enough, and you'll never get there. And that's a lot of the kind of arts training history as well that I.
You've shared that with me. So yeah.
And it's that same story of, if you're not, destroying yourself, you're not working hard enough. And so allowing people to have the permission to go, that's just the story. And actually, it's not supported by the biology. It's not supported by anything, in fact. And, when, coming back to your example of nature and the regenerative capacity of nature, when we start to honor that in ourselves, in our own biology, and by going out and observing it, like, how does my plant deal with stuff? It's like, is it sitting there going, oh my God,
freaking out?
As we come back to, I feel like we are coming back to that. We came from that, we went a long way away, and now we've sort of turned the corner like a cruise ship, slowly turning, and now we're coming back to that, and we're being drawn back to it. But a lot of people are still going, but no, this is
the resistance,
because that's the story I've told myself. And to start to unravel the threads of that story can feel very destabilizing for people, and then the anxiety kicks in. So that's where I feel we're at right now. Everyone's got an inner knowing that model won't work anymore. It's not sustainable. I work with people, some who are in like the climate world, and they're wanting to go out and change something in nature. Well, this needs fixing, the water needs cleaning, the air needs cleaning, and it's like, you don't understand those processes in your own body. Step one is you learn, how does water flow through my body? What is my relationship with air? How do I use that as a regenerative model within me? Then as you go out, it's everything in nature scales, right? So and if you haven't got the small scales taken care of, you're not going to be able to affect the larger scale of it, where you're going to be limited in your capacity to do it. And you're often going to come to it with this, all these people who are, preaching about regenerative agriculture and sustainability, but they don't understand that in themselves. Start there, and then as you go out into nature, nature will model you, and it'll resonate with you. I said to someone a while back who was talking about cleaning up the water, and I said, if you go into nature and say, I'm coming to fix you, water, you need to be, water's going to laugh at you and go, you want to take a look here first,
Right.
So we have to, it's the old practice what you preach kind of mantra.
So true. It's so true. I saw that a lot, like working in the wellness space for the last several years, very similar in terms of shifting from, I'm sort of the guru, to right, like everywhere it's like, I am the guru. You are my teacher, to like, you are your own teacher.
Yes.
So I've definitely seen that a lot in that space.
Yeah, and for me that's also like what I call the pharmaceutical model, right? The old model of healing, which again is going now. We can't do it anymore. There's very little difference between I need a pharmaceutical drug to fix my condition. I am outsourcing my health, my balance to something outside of me, is the same sort of model as going to a guru and saying, you fix me, right? And I've had that in my life just with what I do. Oh, I need you to fix my back, I need you to fix my knees. Like, that's not how this works.
Right.
You have to, and I played that game for a number of years, but the more I was in this space, the more I was going, this, I don't want to be that, I don't want to do that. It doesn't honor nature again. We all need to reflect we're all here to reflect each other and go, have a look at what you're doing this way, have a look at what you're doing this way. And that's all I'm doing with people. And again, they're telling themselves a story, and I'm saying, well, your knee's kind of giving me this whole other story.
Yeah.
I'm just an interpreter in that sense. I'm like, here's another option of how this could be playing out, and just giving people permission to explore. But yeah, this whole notion of the doctor, the guru, it's the same for me. It's the same relationship dynamic of I need someone outside of me to fix me, and this whole thing of people go out and stress themselves into oblivion in their work life, and then they spend 2 weeks at a spa retreat each year and say, well, I feel so much better after that. And then I go out and deplete myself, and then I come.
Right, it's the integration that you always talk about, right? It's like you go to the
why...
yoga class and everything's all blissed out. The second you leave, you're like honking in the parking lot and screaming with your green juice next to you. Like...
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do we make these transferable skills? And it's not to say, yes, you could just sit in Zen mode and everything will come to you. That is a possibility, but it's kind of ninja level, right? But we do need to go out and find the yoga teacher and the breath practice and these things. But, I always say we call them practices. At some point, we've got to put them into action, right? Otherwise, it's just a practice. Over there, when I sit on my yoga mat, I feel great. But as soon as I'm at my computer, we're all over the place. So our bodies are always a very context specific. So if you're always stressed out at your desk and your computer, the body, as soon as you go to your computer, goes, oh, that's where we do the stress thing. And then that mat over there is where we do the chill thing, So how do we take the chill skills to the desk and integrate them there, rather than have this separation, so that we are in a constant state of regeneration. Regeneration happens in every second. You can have that moment of, oh, and now I carry on. You've already had a moment of regeneration. So rather than shoving it all to 2 weeks in Costa Rica or something, and the rest of the time is hell, let's find Costa Rica in every breath.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that always stuck with me, actually, since I met you, is your sharing around adaptability and being adaptable. And I always had in my mind, like, I always felt like an artist, because I'm connected to my heart. Anybody who's connected to their heart has that potential, right? And then it's like, this idea of, very rigid practices to build that artistry, right? And instead, you really were supportive when you shared about just being more adaptable, like more fluid within your environment, and letting everything just kind of continue to feed the next action. Yeah,
and that's again really more based on how the universe actually works, and it's something that I've just lived all my life, just by, I don't know, accident, or if there are such things, I don't know. But I've always done like so many different things. And people say to me, what do you do? My answer was always, what day is it? Well, today I could be a lecturer in university, and tomorrow I'm teaching ballet, and then next day I'm doing treatments, and and people were always trying to, but when I was training as an osteopath and I was still singing with a band at the time, and people would say, oh, so you'll give up the singing once you qualified as an osteopath. I'm like, why? So the story is you're supposed to pick a career and go with it. And that just never resonated with me. I've always, you know, when I was working in theatre, I was still doing treatments during the day. You know, I've always had these other things going on. And that is that adaptability, that elasticity. But it brought a lot of resistance in the world, because that people don't like it when you break the rules.
Right.
Because it makes them question, well, why am I doing that? I could be doing, because I really hate my job and she's kind of doing that. But rather than actually going, well, let's try that, the story is so strong that they reject you and go, well, that's, you're just, you know,
right,
you're not applying yourself.
And I've noticed that actually a lot in business too, because business traditionally has been, you know, I don't like to use like masculine and feminine, right? But like, for lack of a better word, it's been more like sort of masculine, I guess you can say, right? And I realized that, you know, my own mother actually, she kind of grew up in that world where it was, you know, she worked for like some big companies and was in that environment, and always put off art, always put off like that sort of like softer side of things. And what I've realized is that one feeds the other. It makes it sustainable. So the more that I am out in nature and connecting to my senses, or at a ceramics class, or just doing something that lets me be in that sort of space, the more it feeds like what the structure and the kind of more, you know, whatever, like masculine side of the business, right? And so that's been really helpful to figure that out.
Yeah, but again, the story of society is, if you're in the middle of a working day, going out for a walk is like playing hooky, right? It's, you know, oh no, you should be at your desk. Why are you walking in the middle of the day? You know, and I think lockdown has changed that a lot of the time. And even you and I would be like, because we live quite close, and we would, you know, I just get this email going, fancy a walk, you free, you know, and so we go, yes, and then we feel like, ooh, we're kind of running away. But it's like, well, no, why? And I do my best work on walks. You know, any time I've got to do a lecture or a talk or whatever, I go out and walk and I write it in my head as I'm walking, and then I'll come back and capture elements of it so that I've got a bit of a structure for what I'm talking about. But actually, the more I've practiced that, I don't have to plan. I mean, you can just say to me, okay, could you in 5 minutes give a talk on blah? And I'll be like, yeah, okay.
Right.
Whereas I used to be like, got to prepare.
Totally, in your head, and like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And
So those are the skills. And when you look at, again, how memory recall and memory deposition, like from a learning perspective, how it actually functions in the brain and in the body, that those things, learning and memory deposition, are actually a function of our motor system, which is our movement system. So we are much more able to absorb information, to retrieve things from information when we're in motion. So the idea of sitting behind a desk in a classroom with a teacher kind of barking at you and
I was just thinking, that's where my mind went, was classroom. I'm like, so, you know, and then we have these kids that are sitting all day and cutting out like PE and art and anything that like pertains to movement
and then the infrastructure's not set up for it. So as I, you know, because I used to teach that way, you know, when I was teaching in the academic world, you know, that was how it was until I started to go, wait a second, this is not good, you know. And then I was teaching at a university college dance program here, and I was teaching some academic classes for them, and dancers do not like to sit still, right? They're just constantly moving, and I hate sitting still as well, you know. But the classroom was so tiny, and I had like 30 students in this tiny classroom, and so I'd say I prefer if you just walk around while we're doing this, but you know, it's kind of, there isn't room to do it. So we need to rethink, you know, the spaces in which we teach as well, so that they are conducive to people being in motion and being able to absorb and come up with novel information and creative process is all a function of movement. So any writer will know, trying to sit at your desk going, come up with something, go and walk, go and move. So yeah, I think again that story is gone, but our infrastructure is still kind of jamming us into that hole. And so it's now almost more difficult because we know there's another way, a better way, but yet we're still kind of forced into this other mode of doing it. So it really, you know, I feel like we're coming into a time of deep innovation where a lot of these things are going to be, let's just scrap it and start again. Keep patching the old way of doing things. Let's create
Mm-hmm. Well, fear
The
has
new
a
model.
great way of like making you hold on to things, right? It's such an interesting visual. It reminds me of yesterday when you were talking about the birth canal story.
We talk about that.
Yeah. Anyways, so
yeah, and that idea, that actually I it was because I robbed that from a podcast I'd listened to with Zach Bush and Charles Eisenstein and Aubrey Marcus. Go and check that out. It's talking about that often we feel like we're being pushed, and you know, if you think of a baby in the womb, I'm going to kind of really mess this up, but that a baby in the womb is at one point in a really safe space, very held, and food's arriving and everything's kind of cool. And then the birthing process starts and the contractions begin, and you can imagine what that's like for this infant that's suddenly, you know, this thing that's being rejected and ejected from its cocoon, and it can very well think, I'm under attack, you know, that I am absolutely in this horror show now. But it's the mother is trying to push you into life, and that, you know, and then once you see the birth canal open and you go, there's light, head to the light, right? And coming, and then suddenly you're birthed into this world, and the mother wasn't attacking you, very, very much the opposite. She was bringing you into the world. And so we might feel like we're like, oh God, this world's like kind of crazy, but we're about to be birthed into something where we can turn back and go, thank you, I needed that slap in the face. I needed to be bumped around a bit to shake me out of the groove, shake me out of these stories I've been telling myself, and just go, you're birthed anew, run with it. Write a new script.
And there's something that I learned along the way, and I'm still learning, is to slow down, and like you get to choose the process by which you're experiencing that. So it can be like really this super painful process the whole way, bumping your head and doing all this stuff, or you can choose to kind of reframe that and experience it in a different way, because that is life, and that, you know, there is an end to it. So why not enjoy it, right? Or like find ways to interact with it in the way that you want to.
Yeah, find a lesson. And it comes back to that, finding that in every moment there's a moment of respite. And when you can train that into your system, suddenly nothing seems that overwhelming, because you're always like, oh, well, you know, it's just a story. It's just a story. And and what happens is we're coming up against other people's stories all the time as well. You know, I even had that this morning. I had an email from someone that was a little confronting about something, and it sent me into this whole other story, and I was like, whoa, wait a second, you were fine a second ago, and now all of a sudden you're like, oh no,
alarmed.
And because their story was coming up against my story, so I'm like, just see what the stories are, and let's write one that can blend the two scripts and find the middle ground. And you know, it's okay, but we still have these pre-programmed, like, you know, that kind of
I'm actually curious, do you have any recommendations for, I mean, it sounds like having like awareness around that is like one thing, but to have that separation, because I know exactly what you mean. So often I'm like, oh, I've had this amazing morning and whatever, and then suddenly like I open my email or something happens and I'm like, oh, and the whole day I'm like kind of like in this like weird nervous place. Anything aside from awareness that you recommend?
Well, it's about having strategies in place. This kind of comes back to the practice, right? If you've learned some techniques, some breath practice, you know, whatever it is you resonate with that makes you kind of go to that nice chilled place physically, physiologically, then this is the opportunity. So now anytime something like that comes along, this is time where I can try that out and practice putting it into action. So again, that has to be like a conscious process at sometimes. So you can't just jump straight to this. You've got to have learned, you know, when I talk to people about, you know, feeling safe, you know, your body's either running the safe program or the unsafe program. What does safe feel like for you? A lot of people are like, I have no idea. So if you've got no idea, you're going to have to do some deliberate practice to develop a sense of safety, and that can be different for everyone, you know. So I have a variety of different things I kind of throw at people, see, does this feel right? Does this work? Does this get you there? You know, and help people to, once you've found that felt sense of safety, that's myself. You can be there anytime you want, right? You can drop into it. So then we're like, okay, we've got that. Now we have to take it into the real world. And when the email comes in or the phone call or whatever, where did I go? Oh, I went there. Because a lot of people don't even know they've gone to the kind of stress place because it's just so normal. So being aware, you can't change anything unless you're aware that something needs changing, right? So being aware of, oh, I went there. Oh, my shoulder's right. I've stopped breathing. That's stupid, right? Then let's drop in. It is. It's like, why would I stop breathing? That's not like I'm actually, we've got to remember that
going to suffocate myself.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these processes were kind of designed. That's a whole other talk. Who designed and what designed, but they were, really in place for times of mortal threat. When you're literally about to get mauled by a predator. But now, there's nothing about to attack you. So why on earth would you hold your breath? I mean, that's just stupid.
Yeah.
You run on oxygen.
Yeah,
so,
total stupidity.
So I think we were talking about this yesterday, about coming to it with humour, I think is so important.
Yeah.
Because people have this self-punish. If you start ranting at yourself, oh, here I go again, stressed again, why did I get so irrational? So you're just feeding the problem.
Yeah.
So to just come to it with, oh, that's so stupid. Why would I stop breathing? I mean, it's just ridiculous because a bit of text on a screen had some words in it, that sent my body, like, no, I'm not going to allow some words on a screen to make my body run that way. And I always talk about when we're in a stress state, it's very biologically expensive. I hate to compare bodies to machines and computers, but, if you think of your body as having a battery life, it drains a lot of your battery life. So you're going to need recharging, right? But also, it's like, I'm not going to expend all that energy because of this email. That's just stupid. And then have a laugh about it. And then that in itself can be, so humour is a great access to me for just going, oh, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. And then I can drop into that safe place in the body and then go, okay. And then you come back to the issue at hand, whatever it was, and it suddenly seems very different and it suddenly has a whole different complexion on it. So that, in answer to your question, there are lots of different entry points for people, but the point is you have to be aware that you need to override a program that's running. So I even have people like putting little sticky notes on their computer or whatever, just going shoulders or breathe or, whatever that spot is, release the belly or something, if that's your go-to. So just like kind of reminders all the time.
I think that's why people appreciate memes so much,
Right,
yeah. Disruptors, little disruptors that make you laugh throughout your day, right?
Yeah, and just disruptors that draw your attention to what did I do with my body when that stress moment came in? How can I override that? And then you get to the kind of level where you're able to almost in the moment go, I went there. It has to be a conscious process at first, like anything we learn. You're learning to ride a bike or drive a car. At first you're like, I got all these things and traffic and and now you can drive your car and, well, as most people do in LA, and be doing a million other things. And so it's the same thing with this. You've got to be very aware at first and consciously override. The more you do that, the more automatic it becomes, even to the extent that, I will often preempt things. So before I open my email, I'm like, we don't need the belly in to open the inbox, right? Let's set up a state that is conducive to reading these emails to start with. And so you start to get ahead of it rather than being in react respond. You're actually anticipating and setting yourself up in the chill state, ready for whatever comes in. So that's kind of the progression of this, but it starts with just the simplest thing of just checking in when you're in that stress place. What's happening in the body, not what's happening in my head,
right?
Irrelevant. What's happening in the body and how can I override that?
It's interesting how identity plays such a role in what we're talking about here as well, because I've noticed those that kind of just grew up with a really strong sense of self have less of an issue around this topic than those that kind of grew up in environments where they were constantly trying to kind of keep things safe and monitor things outside of themselves. Yeah.
And that's that external versus internal you were talking about.
Yeah.
So people that are brought up with a strong sense of autonomy, self-esteem, sense of self-worth, that they know they are worthy, and that their value is not contingent upon someone's approval or getting the highest score in this or being a successful business person. So that's the difference in psychology that we talk about between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation is, I want to build a business doing this because I love making scarves, or I love making hats, or whatever, you know, and the joy of the creation is what drives you. Then extrinsic motivation, which is a lot of what happens during arts training, and certainly where I was for a number of years, was I've got to be really good at this so I don't either annoy my teacher, or that I can please my teacher or my parents or my, you know, so and then it gets into the profession, I've got to make the audience feel, you know, the critics, that, you know, so you're outsourcing your sense of achievement to something that's outside of your control. So by definition, it is a very precarious place to be, because you cannot control. And I think I was saying it to you yesterday. Not only can you not control anyone else's behaviour, it's none of your business, really. That's their story. Get your own story straight, and then you choose who you're in resonance with and who you're not, and don't fight battles that you don't need to be fighting. So again, it's if people don't have an internal sense of self-identity that knows it's good enough without any external validation and approval, then that's someone who's likely to have the identity piece kind of figured out a bit more, and not be suffering so much from being pulled to everyone else's, you know, baggage, essentially. But that's not what society has done a great job of, particularly as we're into the social media world, because it's all become extrinsic. All, you know, grossly generalizing, but, you know, a lot of the world, and particularly for the young people in the last generation, have grown up in this, it's all about your external avatar, but there's been no attention paid to developing self.
Mm-hmm. That's so
or
true.
very little. I shouldn't be too dualistic about these things, you know.
But sometimes it makes it more fun.
A
little more heated, like very specific. Yeah, exactly.
But again, a sense of you know, authority and something, it makes you feel good, right? Makes you feel safe.
Yeah.
It's like, I know everything, you know nothing.
Exactly.
I'm safe.
There's no ambiguity here.
Yeah. And that's, again, it comes back to that adaptability you were talking about. Life is ambiguous. We are vulnerable every second of the day. We're here in Southern California. There could be an earthquake right now. We think we're safe. We're not.
A tsunami.
You know. The one recently where they said California,
I know.
tsunami, it's California. 1 foot waves.
Whoa, okay, cool. Glad we live on a mountain here, though. That's great.
We're up on the mountain.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But, yeah, so we are vulnerable. So one of the things, you know, I always talk about with anxiety, it's not about being in control. That's as precarious as being out of control. It's being comfortable with vulnerability. And again, the adaptability. Anything that comes in, you can throw at me. I can shift, adapt, accommodate anything. And if you've got those skills, then it doesn't, you know, it's like bring it on, you know.
Right.
It's all an opportunity to find a way around it.
And so how do you get comfortable with vulnerability?
Ooh.
Whoa.
Well, again, recognizing, number one, that you are vulnerable, stopping yourself from looking for ways to control your environment. And again, it comes back to that internal felt sense of safety. If you have that, you could be in front of a firing squad and go, nah, I feel cool.
Yeah.
I can't control what you're about to do to me, so why stress about it? You know, that's kind of an extreme example.
That's super extreme. I like it though.
Yeah, but it's like you have to kind of paint things large to kind of understand it, and then see how that comes into every microsecond of the day. Is that I'm good, you know, I've got that place in me all the time. I can just drop into that state of being, and then it doesn't matter what you throw at me.
Right.
I'm good.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that anxiety is not useful, because if you step off the pavement and there's a truck coming, you want that system. It has its place, you know.
Yeah.
But it's not living in that state all the time of what we call hypervigilance, because biologically it's exhausting, you know.
Why do you think that that's part of the reason why we sort of as a society, at least in the United States, have become so serious? Yeah, it's because we're constantly in that like vigilant state of like, I'm being attacked,
and everybody's judging everyone. You know, we're always like suspicious of everyone. Oh, am I going to like you? Do what do you want from me? You know, it's become this more dog eat dog world, and we're expecting that everyone wants something of you or wants to be better than you. It's this competitive, it's the whole Darwin thing, I'm afraid. You know, he kind of messed things up there, the whole survival of the fittest. It's all about competition. It's not, it's survival of the adaptable. So if you know, as a biological system, just as it happens in nature, you know, if the temperature gets too hot, can we auto cool ourselves? If it gets too cold, which we've been moaning about recently, haven't we? It's very hot today. We can we auto correct from that? It's like our body has a thermostat to keep us within very small margins, like of temperature, of pH, of hydration, whatever. So we're constantly adapting to the environment. And when I'm looking at somebody from a physical perspective who's got some, you know, challenges going on, I'm always looking at that, how can they adapt? And often the degree of emotional flexibility is correlated with the degree of physiological flexibility. And the less we have of that, the more issues we tend to have, you know, from a health perspective. And this is also played out in the heart field as well, when you look at heart rate, what we call heart rate variability, which is one of the measures of health and longevity. The more bandwidth you have, the more your heart can go to really high to really low, the healthier you are, because you can adapt. You know, if a bear suddenly came in this room, we want that heart rate to ramp up really quickly. But if you've only got a small bandwidth and you can't make those big shifts, then you're less likely to survive the situation. So finding this elasticity, so it's not about being in this beautiful kind of, oh, I'm just in this zen state. That's not healthy either. That's, you know, kind of pathology in itself. Unless you're kind of, like I say, ninja level of that. It's the ability to be way up here and have the bandwidth and the ability to flex between all those parameters. That's coping with vulnerability. That's being present for all and any eventualities that might come into my environment right now. So developing physical flexibility can also be a way to access the emotional flexibility. Again, people have different entry points, but typically those two go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think as you're talking, I think so much about like the work that you've done with acting and performing and voice and all these different things, and how that plays such a role within those areas as well.
Absolutely.
Like as an actor, the level of flexibility and range.
Can you be the criminal? Can you be the pious? But you know, how do you have that range in your system? And also, as you said, voice there. One of the measures I use when I'm, you know, normally when I first start working with someone, we have a conversation about where are you at, you know, what's the history, and I'm obviously listening to what they say, but I'm listening to the voice. And if they have a very narrow bandwidth, so a lot of people have this very kind of narrow bandwidth of sound, they're not using all the kind of range that you have in your voice, and go really up and really down, and the sort of elasticity in the voice is often an indicator to me of, oh, we're a little, you know, our bandwidth is very
compressed
narrow
today, are we?
compressed. Or, you know, when they start talking, you know, you get them on one, oh yes, my dog, I love my dog, and then the voice kind of, the bandwidth opens up, and then as you start talking about the back pain or the, you know, whatever story it is that they're not comfortable with, suddenly the voice kind of, or they'll drop into fry, or then, you know, so listening to the quality of bandwidth of sound, how many microtones there are in the sound, is often a really good indicator to me of how, you know, what are the things that are triggering them, and you know, where the health is in the body, and where the entry points are for them. So it's all the same thing. It's all this scalar thing that you know, the bandwidth of the voice, the bandwidth, that it's all frequency, right? All these things, the heart, electromagnetic field of the heart, the voice, can all be measured in hertz, right? It's all a different bandwidth of frequency. So the same applies to everything through the body. And so what we're wanting is to increase our bandwidth in everything, and then be able to adapt and respond to whatever shows up. And that's the universal gym, you know. That's where how you do your workout. You don't, we need a bit of resistance training. So to expect that life is always going to be perfect,
Right.
if you have that, you've got no resistance training. If you don't have resistance training for your muscles, then they'll get weak. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Weak and flabby.
Yeah.
Nobody wants
so
that.
when some challenge comes in, you go, oh good, I need a little bit of a tone up, I need a little bit of a workout today. So seeing the world as your gym you're kind of and that applies to personal relationships as well. It's like, oh, you're going to be my little workout for today. Okay, all right, bring it on.
Or I'm too tired,
or I'm
not
too
gonna
tired,
deal
or
with
I'm
it
just
right
not
now.
going to I'm not going to dial in.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, we kind of explored a
lot of different avenues.
Yeah. Oh, it's just it's always such a joy talking to you and kind of throwing these ideas
Likewise.
around. And
Yeah.
I'm glad we got to share it with you guys, and hopefully it's maybe interesting to you too. So thanks so much, and I look forward to our next little walk.
Thank you so much. Me too.